The man on the bank remained still, staring out at him. Stratton tugged harder on the safety rope. If this really was Jason Voorhees, then it was time for he and Rosen to get the hell out of here. Friday the 13th, Hate, Kill, Repeat, by Jason Arnott. Chapter 2. Sleep wasn't coming easy for Edward Daimler. Maybe it was the blustering white noise of the small hotel room's air conditioning. He never understood people saying that it helped him doze off. Or more likely it was the murder scene which he and Van Stadt had witnessed the previous day. When the phone rang, it shook him out of a terrible dream in which he had been smoking crack cocaine with those 5 addicts of mixed race. The ones who were just about to be murdered. He had been as high as a kite, passing around the druggy paraphernalia and feeling on top of the world. Even though Daimler had never actually done crack, his brain seemed to be doing a good job of stimulating its high. Then the door had burst in and 2 shadowy figures had arrived. He couldn't make out their faces, but they had guns and knives, and clearly didn't intend to join the party amicably. The phone's insistently shrill ringing wrenched him away from the scenario, just as the newcomers started to draw blood. The screams of panic and terror were still echoing in his inner ear as he yanked the plastic receiver from its cradle and held it to his head. "Daimler," he said, wiping perspiration from his brow. He spent the next 60 seconds listening to the latest information salvos. The killers had struck again in the New York State area, this time in Rochester. 3 dead in a scuzzy motel room, seemingly swingers. Daimler listened to a few more details, then put the phone down. Yesterday, the press had grabbed this case by its lapels and shook it hard. These unknown subjects, or unsubs in his abbreviated terminology, were traveling across America on a deadly road trip, and the whole country was waiting for the FBI to crash their party. During the 80s, the Bureau's profiling methods had earned them some confidence among the public. But this didn't stop the pressure piling on like a motherfucker every time the latest killing machine ran amok. The slaughters had started 2 weeks ago in Ohio. They had started in style, too, taking out an entire orgy of 15 people in a dungeon basement. The murders had clearly been the result of a frenzy, repeated stabbings and hammer blows, along with some horrendous sexual mutilation. It was a fucking mess. It had only been in the last week that the FBI had started to link further homicides, which had taken place in different states. The connection was made on the basis of the similar MOs. Brutal assaults on people who could be seen to deviate from societal norms. S&M fans, drug users, swingers. At times, though, the unsubs had demonstrated an even less liberal streak, often couples who had enjoyed sex before marriage. He dialed the number of Van Stadt's room. She answered her phone before the second ring. "What's happened?" Her voice was precise and energetic, but robotic. It was 6:30 a.m., yet you'd swear Van Stadt had been awake for hours. She sounded fresh as a daisy, and he imagined her standing at her window, fully dressed, polished gun sliding suggestively into her shoulder holster. Daimler had only met this girl yesterday when they both arrived in upstate New York, having been assigned to this field case. Already he had formed an impression, a profile. He thought to himself that she was part of Quantico's new breed, hungry, efficient, and eager to demonstrate their skills. Nothing wrong with that, he told himself, even if his own personal prejudices dictated that women weren't cut out for the rigors of this job. She listened silently as he told her about the new killings. "So, we head off to Rochester now?" Yeah," he said. "But let me get myself together first. I'll call you back, okay?" His mouth tasted foul. As the receiver went back down, he eyed the open bottle of scotch with disgust. His workload was getting on top of him. This he knew. He always regretted the drinking binges come the morning. But at night they tended to work. A couple of hours spent slugging down the fire water generally meant a night's peace, even if he paid for it in the morning. Tonight, though, he'd slept fitfully and woken up feeling like shit. He knew he'd become a walking cliché, the law enforcer turning to drink, but he also knew that clichés happen for a reason. Most days in this job, he saw murder scene photographs of butchered and or raped men, women, and children. There had to be a safety valve. If you didn't naturally have one in your life, you installed it yourself. Rolling off the bed, he padded over into the bathroom and spun both shower taps. Water hissed down from the nozzle in concentrated, disparate streams. Damn fancy shower head, he thought. This fucker will take half an hour to get right. 20 minutes later, he persuaded Van Stat to join him for a quick raid on the breakfast buffet. He piled eggs and grits onto his plate, watching with barely concealed amusement as she opted for cereal and yogurt. She was a looker, no doubt about that. Dirty blonde hair just long enough to be tightly pinned at the back of her neck, as it always seemed to be. Pure blue eyes, cold and analytical, but still damn sexy. Fit little body, no doubt partly gained from her Quantico training. She had been with the Bureau less than a year, whereas he had served 12. He tried to remember how he felt when he was in her position, back when he had a marriage and a fire in his belly. His wife had tried to kill him 5 years ago when she sensed that he was considering a divorce. She'd wanted to end up the wealthy, pitied widow, but her plan badly backfired. Despite being his wife, she underestimated his instinctive powers. She did time in jail, along with the jackass she'd hired to run his car off the road. And for that fire in his belly, well, that was still there, but it was generally down to whiskey. Nothing some antacids wouldn't cure. "So, who are the new victims?" she asked him, scooping milky cereal from her bowl. Daimler put the coffee cup down, welcoming caffeine into his system. He sighed. "Sounds like it was a threesome. One middle-aged woman, 2 younger guys." He watched for a reaction and saw nothing. Weirdly, he couldn't imagine Melissa actually having sex. God knows he had tried. She dug her spoon back into the health gloop. "So, it definitely sounds like their handiwork, right?" "Oh yeah, I think it's our guys. Still don't know how many of them there are, though. I'm starting to see them as a couple." "A couple? Man and wife?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Would make sense, seeing as they seem to have an extreme sense of moral outrage. If they adhere to their own code, they would have to be married." Van Stat pondered this for a while, as they sat in silence, the breakfast room's background noises lost on them. Could 2 people really do all this stuff? Van Stat finally wondered aloud. I mean, physically. Could they physically take these people, guns or no guns, 15 people in Chicago, 5 crack fiends here? She finished her bowl and sat watching Daimler. He still couldn't quite read her. Was she waiting for some wisdom from him? Or was she looking at him as though the answer was obvious? "Maybe they already knew their victims," Daimler offered. He stared out of the window, watching a bellboy greet some newcomers at the front of the hotel. The kid dashed toward them, all fake smiles and outstretched palms. "That's it," he said. "Maybe they join in." Van Stat raised a painstakingly plucked eyebrow, but Daimler didn't seem to notice. His eyes darted around, focusing on nothing. "They detest what these people are doing," he continued, by way of explanation, "but they make a show of being into it. They gain their trust and get them high on whatever drugs, sex, good conversation, whatever, I don't know. They're deceptive." "Fair enough," said Van Stat, as if generously considering his ridiculous ideas. "You ready?" She stood up and walked away without waiting for an answer. Daimler watched her go, draining the rest of his coffee. He wasn't at all sure how he felt about this newbie. She was way too big for her boots. Great ass, though. Halo froze solid, halfway across the road. A car horn's frantic blare, coupled with the screech of brakes, told her that she had badly screwed up and could well die within seconds. She had been lost in her own thoughts, devoting all her energy to mental processing with her body set on autopilot. As her legs handled walking along a leafy green path, heading back from the surgery to the trailer park, she dimly stared at her new thrift store sneakers as her brain contemplated about 1,000,000 worries and possibilities. So she was pregnant. There it was, worry number 1, the big kahuna. It hadn't taken Dr. Pryor very long to work this out. Straight off the bat, he had inquired about symptoms she might have been experiencing. Were her breasts feeling more sensitive than usual? Now he came to mention it. Yes, they were. Did she have a metallic taste in her mouth? Yep, sure did. With a knowing but not judgmental nod, he had sent her to a room along the corridor, where a stern nurse asked her to pee into a cup. 10 minutes stretched by, feeling more like days. Then the results came back. Halo Harlan was in the club. You could have knocked her over with a feather. How could she have been so naive? She had felt even more embarrassed when Pryor asked whether she and Trey had been using condoms or other contraception. Trey had worn condoms at first, sure, but then the usual stupid stuff happened. For some reason, people always thought that their partner couldn't possibly be HIV positive, after having been with them for a few months. Then the rule, no glove, no love, was promptly disregarded. The rubber gloves came off. It was a dangerous kind of make-believe. Halo now realized this. Furthermore, she had actually believed Trey when he told her that the rhythm method was 99.9 to infinity% effective. Of course she was pregnant. It all seemed so obvious now, yet so damn premature. Halo had yet to figure what life was all about herself, let alone being able to reassure a kid about the world's unforgiving, random ways. That aside, what was Trey going to think? She believed that he loved her, despite all the unpleasantness, and she loved him too, didn't she? So he would be pleased they were having a kid. Or would he react like her own father and run for the hills? There were so many questions that needed to be answered. All Halo wanted was to live her own little quiet, insignificant life. To be happy. Then this had been dumped on her doorstep. Still, she did love babies. It was at that moment, as Halo Harlan thought about cute little babies while crossing a narrow country road, that the rapidly approaching car blared its warning siren, 3 times in quick succession. Halo opened her mouth, but the expected scream did not emerge. The car was coming straight at her. She was stock still in the road, like a burglar startled by house lights. The vehicle screeched and groaned, the driver trying to prevent the terrible impact. The car finally swung 90 degrees but kept moving in her direction, sideways. Halo truly thought it would hit her, until it came to rest mere feet away, dust rising from its wheels. Halo was trembling, adrenaline pulsing through her. She couldn't believe that she had nearly died, especially so soon after her big news. Tears soon followed relief, as she waited for the verbal abuse which would inevitably follow. Sure enough, the car door popped open at speed, but the driver wasn't quite what Halo had anticipated. Large black ladies weren't uncommon around these parts, but this one looked like she was from further afield. She wore a big floral dress, matched by an elaborately thick headband, which barely kept her rampaging dreadlocks in check. Various pieces of wooden jewelry danced around her neck. The woman ran toward her, arms outstretched. "Over here, girl, are you all right?" The lady's accent was hard for Halo to pinpoint. Was it Southern? Was it foreign? She just couldn't figure it out. Halo struggled for breath. She had learned that she was pregnant and suffered a near-death experience within the space of 15 minutes. The woman's face was etched with concern as she looked Halo over, as though measuring her up for a coffin. "I didn't hit you, right?" Halo shook her head and instinctively embraced this complete stranger. There was something motherly about her that suggested she was safe, certainly safer than wandering across roads like a blind jackass. Suddenly the woman stiffened. She stepped back from Halo, eyes the size of pool balls. It was difficult to know what to make of her current facial expression. Fear, suspicion, compassion, all 3 of them? "Girl," she said, "we need to talk." "Where shall we go next, darling?" Norwood Thawn pursed his lips, as he always did, when giving things calm consideration, then blew a thin plume of cigarette smoke out from between them. He glanced at the woman occupying the passenger seat, who was looking as gorgeous as the first day they met. "Wherever our work is needed, my dear. We're gaining speed now. Our time is at hand. You think the FBI is close behind us?" "Oh, I would imagine so. They'll be profiling us now, trying to work out what's going on up here." He raised a forefinger to his right temple and twiddled it. Penelope stifled a giggle. "Behaviors equal personality. Isn't that their motto?" "Something like that, I believe. But I'd like to think that they'll They'll be able to see what's happened at every stage of our trip. Filthy sinners tempting us at every turn. Penelope nodded. All around their Pontiac Grand Prix, stolen 2 zip codes back, commuter traffic jostled for pole position. She watched a few of the drivers, listening to music, looking at their watches, undoing their ties as the stress kicked in. I'm confident, she said, that whatever the FBI think, we'll get the public vote when the time comes. This is all long overdue. It is, said Norwood, checking his rearview mirror as they switched lanes. Such a shame that we have to sully ourselves in order to carry out the work. I feel unclean. Poor darling. Penelope blew him a kiss and returned her oddly piercing gaze to the road that flashed beneath them. Halo helped the woman, whose name was Denzella, push her car off the road. Then they sat inside the vehicle. Through the windshield they could see only the woods, where a thin morning mist still hovered in sheets. At first there was an uneasy silence. Halo broke it. Ma'am, do you want me to sign something legal to say it was my fault? Denzella's pensive expression momentarily lifted, and she looked amused, shaking her head as though Halo were a naive, innocent child. Halo didn't feel that way. After all, she was already a pregnant teenager with an abusive boyfriend, but life admittedly puzzled her much of the time. The world was a jigsaw, and she only held a few of the pieces. No, dear, I don't want to sign anything. First, let me tell you what I do for a living. I am a psychic. I read people's tarot cards. You know what those are. Halo nodded, feeling slightly patronized now, but trying not to show it. Of course you do, said Denzella. Ha! You can never hide anything behind those eyes. Your heart is truly on your sleeve, child. Halo stared back out the woods. So, do you want to give me a reading? I don't have much money. Denzella shook her head again. I don't need the tarot cards, dear, and you don't need money to hear what I'm going to tell you. I had some very strong feelings when I came near you a moment ago. The two women's eyes met for a second. And no, said Denzella, I'm not a lesbian. Their faces dissolved into laughter, diffusing some of Halo's tension. Then Denzella's face hardened again. I have to warn you, child, that when we touched, I momentarily became you, feeling what you will shortly feel, and the emotion was fear. A storm is coming. It will take the shape of 3 people, but one man in particular, he... Denzella frowned as though unsure of herself. He felt to me like a man-child, an angry child in a man's body. He is evil personified, girl. When you see him, run. Halo's stomach had been clenching throughout this woman's prophecy. Was she talking about Trey? If so, he was already with her. So evil is coming? Said Halo, anxiously wringing her hands. Sounds great. What will happen to me? I can't say, admitted Denzella, because I don't know. She paused for a moment, then offered her big palm. Give me your hand, child. Halo did so and watched as Denzella closed her eyes. It was creepy to think that this woman might be mainlining into her soul. The wings of destiny, said Denzella. The wings of destiny will save you when the time is at hand. There'll be a wonderful new arrival, but you'll also suffer great loss. Halo placed her free hand on her flat abdomen. She knew what one of these precious predictions meant, but didn't like the sound of the great loss. Beware the mask, Denzella added. I'm seeing masks worn by immensely dangerous people. Masks, both real and imaginary. You understand me? Halo nodded vaguely. Denzella regarded her with something like sympathy. I can see that you're a very trusting person, Halo, she said. You take people at face value, but sadly leaves you open to attack in this day and age. Please tell me that from this moment on, you'll at least question other people's motives. Sure. Halo was feeling overwhelmed. I'll do my best to be distrusting. Denzella smiled and checked her watch. I gotta go, she chimed. I'm due to arrive for some tarot work in Clearwaters in about 20 minutes. Halo grimaced, knowing that it was an hour's drive away at the very least. Hopping out of the car, she accepted the strange prophet's business card and waved. Then she watched as the vehicle remounted the road and swiftly turned a corner, disappearing behind the woods. Denzella's words hung on the air. A storm is coming, in the shape of a man. Despite the heat, Halo found herself shivering. She wondered again if the prophecy referred to Trey, and what he might do when he discovered she was pregnant. She shook her head. No use in thinking like that, especially on such a flimsy basis. Denzella had been nice, but Halo wasn't so sure that she believed in all that horse shit. She decided to tell Trey about the baby this weekend. They could all celebrate at the campsite. Setting off along the path once again, Halo was glad to be alive. She was also doing her best to remain alert. After all that mumbo-jumbo, she half expected deceivers and stormbringers to leap out from under the bridge that spanned the North River. No matter how she tried, the image of the storm, the man-child, lingered. "Hey, Abe, quit playing with yourself and listen to this. I found a fucking head down here." Rosen's announcement came an hour after he and Stratton had arrived at the lake. They had been dispatched down here at very short notice, having been told that this was a maximum priority job. Search the lake, they were ordered. Search it with a fine-tooth comb. Report any bodies or body parts found. Abe Stratton had started to dread these jobs with Rosen. At first, the two police divers had enjoyed a few laughs as they went about their frequently grim work. Once or twice, they had even sunk a couple of frosty tall boys together when they were done. Recently, however, familiarity had bred contempt, or maybe it was his injury. He'd twisted an ankle while rock climbing, changing their working relationship. Whereas they would previously take it in turns to be the guy in the boat and the guy who searched deep waters for murder weapons and dead flesh, the past 3 weeks had seen their roles necessarily frozen. Stratton stayed in the boat, monitoring the safety line while Rosen prowled the depths. In a way, he didn't blame Rosen for resenting him. It had been nearly lunchtime when they parked the truck near Clearwater's modest banks. As they unpacked the equipment, Stratton had noticed a lone camping tent in the woods on the other side of the lake. He ignored it. The campers would inevitably gather on the opposite bank and stare. Rubbernecking was part and parcel of this job, even though 99% of the time there was precious little to see. They boarded the boat and the long, slow process began. Rosen heaved the oxygen tanks onto his back, half-jokingly branded Stratton a lucky fucker, and disappeared into the calm waters with the mega-powered portable torch. Stratton had watched his colleague's image distort and break up until it finally blended with the darkness as Rosen neared the lake's bed. After that, it was a waiting game. Every now and then, Rosen would check back in with him and they would move the boat. They worked to a grid system to ensure that the whole area was covered evenly. In between Rosen's returns, Stratton would sit back and prop up his bad foot, trying to keep an eye on his partner's safety line, despite the latest issue of Playboy trying its hardest to distract him. He hadn't expected anything to be found. This made Rosen's sudden exclamation regarding the head even more of a surprise. The two men looked at each other, Rosen's scuba mask resting on top of his bald head as he clung to the side of the boat, relishing the fresh air. "Do you think he'll live?" Stratton asked. The two men laughed. In this job, humor helped bolster the thin wall which kept people from losing their minds. "Why don't you bring him up to say howdy?" "I tried, but it's stuck in the mud. Give me something to dig with." Stratton fished around in the tool bag and found a pick, handing it over. Rosen flipped the scuba mask back over his face and vanished back into the depths. He'd been laughing nervously, back up there with Abe. Something about this job was freaking Michael Rosen the hell out. At times, the watery depths seemed to play with your mind, and alter your perceptions. Rosen was prepared for this, and, after 5 years on the job, he took it into account, realizing that underwater searches were, by their nature, disturbing experiences, just like identifying formations of rock and weed, where human corpses were more likely to become snagged. In these 5 years, though, he had never heard a voice inside his head. The voice wasn't actually saying anything, at least nothing he could discern. It was a soft, sing-song voice like that of a little kid, a child playing all by itself, a child forced to make its own entertainment. When Mother wasn't around, the other kids wouldn't play. Jesus, he thought, why the merry hell am I thinking like this? I've got to find a new partner until Stratton's fucking foot heals up. All this underwater work must be putting undue pressure on my brain. He plunged, pointing the torch beneath him, until the lake floor rose up to meet his feet. Was it his imagination, or was the water getting colder? Now, where was that head? He turned almost a full circle until the torch beam found the hideously decayed thing, standing upright on the lake's bed. the neck buried in the mud. Rosen guessed it had been here a while. Either that, or the guy was always an ugly fuck. The child's voice was louder, yet still indistinct. The head opened its eye. Rosen floated for a moment, legs flapping, staring down at the thing that should not be. It hadn't occurred to him that the apparently disembodied head was attached to anything below the lake's surface. That would be impossible, right? Even though he could sense something entering his body, some kind of new strength, replacing the fear he had initially felt, it didn't disturb him. He felt as though his own batteries were being recharged above and beyond their capacity. It felt damn good. There was nothing to be afraid of here. This guy was simply buried in the lake's bed. He needed help, and he needed it fast. That's what guys like him and Stratton were here for. Michael Rosen raised the pick. Then he slammed it repeatedly into the ground around the thing. The water around him swiftly became muddled as thick clogs of dirt were freed from bondage and sailed slowly upwards into his field of vision. Yet his force and precision remained impeccable. Within 60 seconds he had revealed the buried man's shoulders. Stratton watched as a dark circle formed on the surface near the boat. It was mud, rising. He grimaced and returned to the pages of Playboy. Better him than me, he thought. Hey, Gina, come look at this. There's something going on out on the lake. Inside the tent, Gina had finished packing her things. At the sound of Bobby's voice, she rolled her eyes. The last thing she needed was yet another fascinating camping-related sight. This trip had already been a bust, and she was supposed to be spending the rest of the weekend with this dull, if admittedly well-hung bastard. "What is it?" she yelled. "Come see!" "Fuck you!" she murmured, continuing to pack. Rosen was hacking 2-3 feet beneath the lake floor. While the water naturally filled any hole he created, he was making good progress. The figure was almost half free of the sediment. Rosen could see a loop of chain which hung around the man's neck. The eye was fixed on him. Rosen maintained contact with it as he frenziedly carved at the sediment. While some deep part of him, a part which had somehow been smothered, knew that this thing was unadulterated evil, he didn't feel afraid in the least. He slammed the pick into the ground again and again and again. Sweat was forming condensation inside his masked visor, but he seemed able to continue using instinct alone. What was happening to him? Best not to think about it. Keep working. Free this poor guy. The black circle was thick and spreading. Huge slabs of mud were rising to the surface. Stratton began to wonder whether Rosen was all right. Why all this work to free a head from the mud? He leaned over and tugged on the safety rope. Then he waited for the tug back. Nothing happened. He tugged the safety rope again, harder this time. The giant was almost free. Rosen felt victorious as he hacked at the final pieces of mud, holding the man's huge feet in place. He hadn't seen much of the giant's body during this operation, due to the black water which surrounded him. The diver was practically inverted, his head and upper body dipping into this hole of his own making. It was over 6 feet deep. Had he enjoyed full control over his mind, he might have vaguely anticipated what would happen next. 2 strong hands grabbed his legs, exerting a painful iron grip. One of the giant's feet tore free of the sediment below and kicked Rosen squarely in the face, smashing his scuba mask and reducing his nose to pulp. Water began to flood into his suit. Amid his sudden panic, Rosen felt the giant's body rising beside him, while those hands simultaneously forced him further down into the hole. His own hands thrashed madly, but failed to make any purchase on the slick, crumbling walls. Black, foul water pumped down his throat, leaving him bug-eyed and praying for air that would never come. The last thing Rosen felt was sheer, claustrophobic terror as a pile of mud was forced down around his head and shoulders. The very same earth that he had hacked loose was being kicked back into the hole. Jason Voorhees stood on the lake bed, watching the upside-down man who was embedded up to his waist in filth. Only when the rubber-clad feet stopped kicking and twitching did Jason release the legs. They floated lifelessly in tune with the lake's current. Jason looked at them. He wore clothes that appeared blackened and burnt. His spine, ribs, and other bones were visible through what remained of his flesh. He cocked his head upward, sensing something. Noise, movement, life. A rope was being tugged from above. Jason's broad shoulders angrily rose and fell. Then he bent down and snatched the pick from Michael Rosen's right hand. The Playboy magazine splayed open on the floor of the boat. Stratton was fumbling around in the bag looking for various component parts of the second diver's suit. Why did this have to happen? Mike had never gotten himself into trouble during the 16 months they had worked together. Something registered in the corner of his eye, and he turned his attention from the bag, following the source of the distraction. His breath caught in his throat. Standing on the lake's bank, maybe 20-25 feet away from him, was a tall, well-built man wearing a hockey mask. He stood motionless, hands by his side. He was holding a small axe. Stratton knew that in this kind of situation, people tend to disbelievingly rub their eyes or blink several times. Yet he was a man who always trusted his perception. What he saw was what he saw, and that was the end of it. His up-close and personal encounters with grim chunks of human anatomy, floating deep down for all the fish to feast on, had strengthened his straightforward conviction. The man on the bank remained still, staring out at him. Stratton tugged harder on the safety rope. If this really was Jason Voorhees, then it was time for he and Rosen to get the hell out of here. Call the local cops, let them deal with it. He was a diver, not a law enforcer. Still no response from down below. Something must be really wrong. Tearing his eyes away from the figure on the bank, Stratton yanked the second wetsuit from the bag. Bobby bent double, laughing quietly with the glee of it all. He knew this was wrong, maybe even a felony, but it sure was funny. He turned away from the lake, the sun glinting on his hockey mask. Then he headed back to the tent to tell Gina all about it. She'd pee herself. Back over his shoulder across the lake, a large shadow climbed onto the boat. Stratton felt the vessel's balance shift dramatically. He was in the wetsuit and only had the mask to go. But had Rosen clambered back on board behind him? He turned just in time to receive a pick in his left eye. The tool slammed against his head, bursting the orb and splattering his face with vitreous fluid. With his one remaining eye, he saw a vision of hell and knew, in his last seconds, that the real Jason Voorhees had dispatched him. Jason released the pick. Stratton fell backwards over the rim of the boat and plunged into the lake. "Hey, Gina, I think we better go," chuckled Bobby, the mask sitting on top of his head as he re-entered the tent. His girlfriend sat cross-legged, all packed and ready to leave, filing her immaculate fingernails. "No kidding," she said. "And we're not going to another campsite. We're going home. Or at least I am." Bobby's laughter lines faded. He had been about to tell her how he had just fooled some diver into thinking he was Jason Voorhees. But that seemed fairly unimportant. "What do you mean?" he frowned. Gina locked eyes with him contemptuously. "I'm bored. You're a boring little boy, Bobby. I'm going to go home, find me a real man who doesn't think camping is, really exciting. Oh, and for your information, watching a man chop wood for 1 whole hour isn't remotely erotic. It's screamingly tedious." Bobby opened his mouth to speak, but said nothing. Being spurned by a woman was a new experience for him, and his brain didn't have a stock response. So he turned and walked out of the tent. "Where are you going?" cried Gina after him. "You've got to take me home, dickwad." Bobby walked blindly back toward the lake, his mind a blur of confusion and rage. That girl had to be a lesbian. His grip tightened on the axe. Suddenly his path was blocked by a man mountain, a good foot taller than him. One malevolent eye fixed on him as the figure pulled back a slimy, black-clad fist. Bobby's scream was cut short as Jason's blow powered through his face, emerging through the back of his skull, coated red and clutching shattered chips of bone. His eyes momentarily crossed, gazing down at the fist, which had ruined his nose, his mouth, and everything down to his chin. Then they rolled up into their sockets. The corpse sank to its knees, and Jason stooped slightly, his arm remaining inside the boy's head. Then he yanked upward, snapping the skull loose from the neck. Jason examined the cranium, which was sitting halfway up his forearm, like some grisly wristwatch. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes as he saw the mask, which still remained strapped to the top of the boy's head. He tugged it loose and swiftly used it to cover his own face, tugging the straps into place behind his putrid skull. He stood there for a long moment, as though momentarily relieved in some small way. Picking up the axe which the boy had dropped, He tested its weight in one hand, then resumed his purposeful stride into the woods, his home from home. It wasn't long before a tent stood out among the trees. Someone was inside, a girl, calling out to him. "Oh, you'd better be coming back, Bobby Johnson. Take me home, goddammit!" Jason walked straight for the tent, then trod over it, homing in on the human inside. Gina's voice swiftly became a blend of anger and anxiety. "What the hell are you doing? Quit fucking around, Bobby!" She stood up as Jason located her and tightly wrapped the yellow canvas around her. The voice became fainter, smothered, yet shot through with terror. "Bobby, let me go, Bobby, please!" Jason raised his right arm. For a second, the severed head of Bobby Johnston stared blankly down at the tent-wrapped figure below. The surrealism of the scene was lost on Jason Voorhees. He brought his arm down, smashing Bobby's dead skull repeatedly against Gina's. After 6 blows, the canvas was soaked with blood. Jason carried on, regardless. It was almost 1 p.m. when Halo arrived back home, and she knew what that meant. In fact, she could hear what that meant. Duke and the others had arrived at the park. She stood at the front gate for a while, gathering her thoughts. She was still trying to come to terms with the morning's events. When she finally summoned the mental strength to show herself, Trey was loading their gear onto Duke's pickup truck. Duke, a tattooed bear of a man, sat on the steps to the trailer, drinking from a beer can. Standing next to him were Basket, Duke's skinny, crazy-eyed brother, whose real name Halo had never been told, and his feline girlfriend Shona. Trey threw Halo one of his deadly looks. "Where the gallopin' fuck have you been, girl? I had to pack your shit myself." Halo swallowed hard. Luckily, distraction was immediately provided by Basket and Shona rushing over to greet her. As she hugged Shona, Halo looked over the girl's shoulder to see Duke raising his beer to her, almost grudgingly. As usual, the mechanic's face was smeared with black grease. She gave him a token, transparent smile, then averted her gaze. "We all done?" grunted Duke to Trey, gesturing toward the truck with his beer. "I guess so," said Trey sourly. He leaned against the vehicle and wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes burning holes in the side of Halo's head. "Okay," she said with all the enthusiasm she could muster. "Let's go have ourselves some fun." My Life, Part 1. Sins of the Mother. I was 6 when I saw my father kill my mother. It was some early hour of the morning, and I'd had a bad dream. Something about a demon chasing me through a forest. I was terrified, and I wanted reassurance from my mom and dad, mainly my dad. Lately, Mom hadn't been much use. Walking across the landing, I creaked open their bedroom door. The 2 bedside lamps were on, but the room was empty. I turned my head and saw that the stairs to the ground floor were illuminated at their foot. They were downstairs, maybe in the kitchen. I moved to the top of the stairs and listened hard, recoiling slightly as angry voices drifted upwards. Whenever they had arguments and fights, it made my stomach tighten like a fist. I swayed against the banister, feeling queasy. It took me at least 10 minutes to descend the staircase. Something was holding me back. Right there and then, I thought it was fear. With the benefit of hindsight, I know it was resisting destiny. I could make out what the 2 of them were saying, and it wasn't good. "Put that down, you stupid motherfucker," said my mom. "What are you going to do, kill my ass?" "Your time has come," came the reply, his voice firm and even. "It's for the common good." I ran to the door of the kitchen, my heart pumping madly. I stared inside the room, just in time to see the carving knife sinking into my mother's heart. She was gripping my dad's arms, looking into his eyes with utter disbelief. Drops of blood fell from her mouth as she made terrible choking noises. As she slumped to the ground, still holding on to my dad, her gaze shifted and rested on me. What I then saw in her eyes is something I've never been able to forget. My own mother looked horrified by my complete lack of compassion. Inside, I did feel bad for her, but on the outside, all I did was stand there and watch her hit the parquet tiles and struggle through several last breaths. My father seemed to know I was there because he slowly turned to face me. He appeared sorry for what he had done. "Sit down," he said quietly, pointing to one of the kitchen chairs. I did so, stepping over my mother's legs in the process. He sat opposite me, his big eyes open and earnest. "Do you know why your mother has to die?" he asked me. I thought for a moment, trying not to look at the corpse. Then I slowly nodded my head. I think so, Dad. Why do you think it had to be done? He had asked me gently. Because she was a bad person, I said. Father nodded gravely. Yes, she was. Remember how we talked before about sinners, Munchkin? Sinners have to what? Sinners have to pay. That's right. Sinners have to pay. It's our responsibility to ensure that they do. Your mother was drinking, taking drugs. Last week, she even slept with another man. I blinked at this revelation, and my bottom lip quivered. How could she do that stuff, Dad? I had asked, not expecting an answer. Then I pointed at my mother's dead body. I'm glad she's dead, I decided. That's a good Munchkin, said Dad, rubbing my hair. Now I'm going to take Mother down to the woods. We're going to tell everybody that she's gone away and left us. You understand? I nodded at him, then remained on the chair, my young legs dangling, as he dragged my mom to the family camper. I fully understand what my dad was doing and why. The mask of deception was already sliding into place. I would wear it for many years to come. Okay, this has been chapters 2 and 3 of Friday the 13th Hate Kill Repeat. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I've got bigger hopes for this book so far than I did for Hell Lake after the first few pages. So, at least this guy seems to have watched some Jason movies. At least part 7. At least part 7. I do apologize for my voicing of Denzella. The book was not real clear on how I was supposed to hear her voice, to portray her voice. So, it was very vague, and I am kind of under the weather. So, yeah, I know that isn't my best narration when it came to Denzella's lines, but thankfully she's out of the book now. Anyways, I'll see you guys tomorrow when I do some more chapters from Jason X, Planet of the Beast. And I'll be back Sunday with some more of Friday the 13th Hate Kill Repeats. Thank you all for subscribing. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe. We're doing a giveaway right now. There's almost 2 weeks left in the contest. I uploaded the video yesterday, the one that says 500 subscribers contest giveaway. Go to that video for details on how to win 2 of these rare books from the Black Flame, Friday the 13th, Jason X, or Elm Street collection. Please take time to click that like button. Click the bell so you always know when new chapters are dropping. Please drop me a comment below. I love hearing from you guys, new subscribers and old. I love being able to talk back and forth with you guys about these books, what you think of them. I want to answer any questions you might have about future content. I'm just as big of a fan as you are. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening. And don't click that thumbs down, because
it's got a death curse!